I am finally posting this week. I know that a few of you have been asking when I'm next going to post, so here it is. Obviously I failed to post last week and then again this week on Monday, but I finally got round to posting at least this week. Basically, work has just been super busy, and by the time I have finished work, I am just so super exhausted, and videoing and editing has kind of just taken a backseat. I, for once, have not pushed myself to just carry on like I am in the bad habit of doing. Instead, I've listened to my body and I have taken some time to just rest and let my body recover. Which takes us on to this week's video and what it's about. So, in most videos, I know that I talk about my condition in some degree, and for those of you who have been following me for a while, especially over on Simply AJ, will know what that condition is and kind of a little bit about what it entails. However, most of you who are following me are new here, thank you very much guys, but obviously a lot of you won't know what I'm actually talking about. So I figured I would talk a little bit about what my condition is, what comes with it, a little bit about my diagnosis story, and also what it was like growing up with a chronic illness and kind of what it was like to go through all of that as a teenager. So basically, let's start off with what my condition actually is. So my condition is called joint hypermobility syndrome, which is what it was known as when I was diagnosed. It still kind of is, but it now comes under the umbrella of hypermobility spectrum disorder. Basically, it is a connective tissue disorder which is caused by having joint hypermobility and kind of joint laxity. So while there may be a lot of people that are hypermobile, i.e. can do this, where my fingers go right up, there will be a lot less people who actually have the connective tissue disorder that comes with it. So basically, the easiest way to explain what it's like is basically chronic musculoskeletal pain. Now, for those of you who aren't clued up in biology, the musculoskeletal system is the joints, the bones, the ligaments, tendons and muscles that make up our body. So obviously, when I say chronic musculoskeletal pain, obviously you can imagine that that pain is basically all over my body. So basically, I was diagnosed back at the back end of 2012, beginning of 2013, after a very lengthy process. I kind of did speak a little bit about my diagnosis journey over on Simply AJ, so I will link that below, and I won't go into that much detail in this video because it will take forever. But basically, it started back in 2008 when I was back and forward from the doctors with neck pain, back pain, knee pain, kind of all sorts of pain, obviously mostly to do with my joints. At the time, it was shrugged off as growing pains, kind of normal wear and tear for a teenager, and my knee pain was also diagnosed as something called Osgood-Schlatter disease, which is basically pain and swelling that occurs under the knee from playing a lot of sports. Which makes sense, I was very sporty kid. So that constant back and forth, the shrugging off, just putting it down to being a normal teenager, kind of continued until around 2011 when I finally got a doctor who looked into my medical history, listened to what I was actually experiencing, kind of put all that together and saw that it was a lot more than what my medical diagnoses were explaining, and also believe in the fact when I said it was getting progressively worse, and that's when he referred me to the hospital. Now, when I say it was getting progressively worse, I'm talking about getting in from school, because obviously I was at school at the time, so getting in from school and going to sleep for a few hours until my parents got home, being woken up to have my tea, basically being awake another hour, 2 hours, and then getting into bed and going to sleep for the rest of the entire night, for a full night. When it was the school holidays, I would be literally sleeping all day, and that was because I literally couldn't physically stay awake. Some days I would get up and I would struggle to even get out of bed, let alone manage to get downstairs. In my parents' house, their bathroom is downstairs, so times when I wasn't able to get out of bed, I was literally crawling down the stairs to even go for a wee. Luckily, I didn't need to go out that often, which is a very good thing, but this is something that could literally last for weeks at a time. But the big final kicker that finally got the ball rolling towards my diagnosis was basically in 2011, I think it was in November, I had a maths GCSE and I got up in the morning, I went downstairs and I didn't even make it to the kitchen before I fainted. Now when I came around, I think it's probably the most worried I have ever seen my parents, like honestly. And they were adamant that I was not going to school that day, which when I tell you is a rare thing. Yeah, they were really worried. Basically, I had to remind them that it was my maths GCSE and that I could not miss that day. And they were like, oh, well, we'll ring the school and we'll kind of get something organised for you to sit another time. I was like, no, it doesn't work like that. I need to go in, I need to do my maths GCSE. So after a lot of toing and froing, we finally agreed that I could go and do and sit my exam, yes, in the state that I was in, but agreeing to them taking me right to the front doors of my exam hall and dropping me off. Obviously they'd called ahead to the school to explain what was happening, so they knew that I was basically literally getting dropped off at the front doors to be let in to sit down. They would then, obviously once the exam's over, pick me straight back up again, and then I would be going for an emergency doctor's appointment. Basically from there I had to go for loads more MRIs, more x-rays, more blood tests, kind of everything that I could be thrown at that I've already had in the past leading up to that 2011 period. They threw at me again, to no avail. Basically they couldn't come up with anything that was explaining what I was going through. So to manage the pain, they transferred me to a specialist physio at the hospital. So obviously when I was going through all this, I was in the paediatric department, so they transferred me to a paediatric specialist physio. And the first thing that she noticed when she obviously took a look at me and examined me was that when I was standing there, I had flat feet. Now from there, that led to a lot of prodding and poking at my other joints and obviously asking me different questions. And from there, that's when she obviously discovered that I was hypermobile, and that was probably what was causing my pain. So she presented her findings to my rheumatologist, because that was the department that I was in at the time. She presented those findings to the rheumatologist, and that was when I finally got a diagnosis. So obviously the diagnosis at that point was joint hypermobility syndrome, and in all honesty, it was such a relief to actually know that there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't just imagining things when I was feeling all these things. Obviously, I kept getting put off at being a normal teenager, a lazy teenager, because I was staying in bed all day, etc. But I knew there was something more to that, so it was finally a relief to actually know what was wrong with me. It made managing the symptoms a lot easier, because obviously now I finally knew what was wrong, why I was experiencing these symptoms, and basically had ways to be able to manage those symptoms. So, speaking of symptoms, I will go into a few that I experience. There are a lot more symptoms and other conditions which are actually conditions on their own outside of JHS. But they are ones that also come as part of having joint hypermobility syndrome. But like I say, thankfully I do not experience all of them. So for the most part, the symptoms that I do experience have been since it all started way back in 2008. Some of them have got worse over time, but that is the thing with chronic conditions, that they are likely only to get worse. Unfortunately, they either stay the same or they get worse. They don't tend to get better, because with chronic conditions, there usually isn't a lot that can be done to help. So in my case, The only thing that can really be done is to manage pain levels, and obviously if I had any of the other conditions which come as part of joint hypermobility syndrome, then they would obviously treat those ones as well. Like I say, I don't have many, so what I do suffer from, it's just about managing them and how I can self-manage them basically. So the symptoms that I have are, the first one is fatigue. In some cases, very, very extreme fatigue. Now, there's a common misconception with fatigue. A lot of people mistakenly identify fatigue as just plain tiredness. Now, it is completely different to tiredness. Tiredness you get when obviously you have kind of overdone it and you're a little bit tired, you need to go to bed, you go to bed and you wake up feeling great in the morning. Fatigue is a lot more than that, but I will not go into the detail of that today. That is something that I will talk about either over on Simply AJ or in another video on here. Another one, which is the main one, is pain. Some days are worse than others, but there is always some level of pain on a daily basis. With that, obviously that can be managed with painkillers, which I try not to take unless I'm really bad. Basically, I don't really know, I guess I kind of compartmentalised my pain a little bit, in that if it's the normal level that I suffer, I kind of am able to ignore it now because I'm so used to it. Obviously it has now been 13 years since it all started, so I've kind of learned to cope with the normal level. So basically I don't take any painkillers until it is above that normal level, just because I don't really want to kind of let the painkillers not work anymore. I would rather live with my normal level of pain because it is at a point where I have managed to make it manageable as such. It's quite hard to explain. Obviously, other people that have chronic illnesses will understand what I'm talking about. It is very hard to explain what I mean otherwise. But like I say, unless it's above that normal level of pain, I try to stay away from painkillers just so that they don't stop working when I really need them. The next one, which is a major one for me, especially at the minute, is mood swings. And I think the reason that these are a lot worse at the minute is probably due to COVID and lockdown. We have now been in lockdown for a year, guys, so I don't think that it's helping, but mood swings are a major one for me. Basically, the reason these happen is because obviously we are dealing with that level of pain every day, so the slightest thing that kind of goes wrong is just enough to kind of like overwhelm us and just set us off. It is a really frustrating one to have because you don't mean to have mood swings, you don't mean to lash out at your loved ones, but it is a part of the condition and we can just cope with it as best as possible. As a woman, it can be even worse once a month. So when it gets to that time of the month for me, basically everyone runs and doesn't talk to me for like a week, and then they all come back. Jokes, they don't actually run away. But I am a lot worse once a month, obviously, because I am a woman and hormones exist. So add hormones into the mood swings that I get because of my chronic condition. It's interesting to say the least. Next one, which is I've kind of gone into a little bit briefly before, is the mobility struggles. Thankfully, they are not as bad as they used to be before I was diagnosed / when I was first diagnosed. But they are, I think, because I have learned again what I can and can't do. I mean, there is a level of unpredictability with this condition, so I could do absolutely nothing one day and still be bad the next day. I could do something one day, be really bad the next day, and then I could do something one day and be absolutely fine the next day. So there is that level of unpredictability, but I am quite good now, which I think is what helps, is that I'm much better at planning and making sure that I don't overdo it. So basically, if I've got plans to go out on a Friday night, I would try and make sure that my Saturday and Sunday are clear of any plans, just in case I am bad. Or if I do have plans, which is unusual, because like I say, I do try and make sure that they don't, I do try and pre-warn the people that I have those plans with, just to make sure that if I do end up having to cancel at the last minute, they are kind of pre-warned and it's not an unexpected thing for them. Obviously, if you have a chronic illness, you will understand the pain and the frustration of having to let someone down last minute, but unfortunately it is something that is out of our control. The next one is insomnia, or as we like to call it in the chronic illness community, painsomnia. Now, as the name suggests, obviously the reason we call it painsomnia is because the reason that we usually can't sleep at night is because of the pain. Thankfully, it's not one that I really struggle with. It is worse in the winter, if anything, because that's when my condition is worse. But thankfully, fingers crossed, touch wood, at the moment, that's not something that is so prevalent in my life. However, one that is very bad and is very common is brain fog. Now again, as the name suggests, imagine having basically some really bad thick fog in your brain that you can't see through. So basically you can't think clearly, you can't concentrate properly. Even on bad brain fog days, you might not even be able to think of the most simplest word that you were trying to think of. My family and friends have got to a point where they are so used to now having to finish my sentences or try and work out what I'm saying just by me going after saying half a sentence. They've gotten quite good at it, to be fair to them, so bravo to them. But yeah, that is something that is very, very common with me, and it's one that is very, very frustrating, but unfortunately that is brain fog. Next one is bruising easily. Now, when I was younger, I used to be covered in a load of bruises, especially on my legs. I was covered in that many bruises all the time. I'm surprised my parents didn't get rang up by like the school or something asking questions about abuse, because there was literally that many. Now, when I say there was a lot, I'm probably talking about I didn't ever have less than 10 on my legs at any one time. That's both of my legs, by the way. Not 10 on one leg. But yeah, so basically that is because the slightest of knocks would cause a bruise. I'm at a point even now, I'm not quite 10 on both legs, but I'm at a point where I will get asked by my family members and my friends how I managed to get this bruise and whatever else, and I will not be able to tell them because it's not something that I specifically remember doing. Now, most of you who get bruised, you will probably remember how you did it because it takes a lot for you to get bruised. No, not with me. I can literally probably bang my arm on the side of this desk and it will, very lightly, and it will end up in a bruise. So when I say it's just something that appears on my body and I don't know how it happens, it's something that's very easily done. And like I say, if I get asked why I have a bruise, I probably will not be able to tell you. Another one that is quite common with me is clicking joints. Now, my family and friends, when they hear me click, basically, I can't move without clicking. So every time it happens, I tend to get some family member or some friend going, ouch, that must have really hurt. And to be quite honest, I'm so used to it now that it tends not to hurt, unless I have subluxed it, which takes me on to subluxations and dislocations. So subluxations, as you've just heard me call them, I call them sublux. Just it's much easier to say than the full word. But basically, subluxes are where you semi-dislocate a joint. Much easier to pop back into place than a proper dislocation, and unlike a dislocation, you are likely to be able to pop that back into the joint without actually having to go to a hospital or a doctor or something like that. Thankfully, I don't tend to experience dislocations. Subluxes a little bit more common, but again, not that common compared to a lot of other people that have the same condition as me. So I am really, really quite lucky. There are also probably more symptoms that I experience that I have just forgotten about. Because I am so used to them, it's just something that I do not think about. So actually trying to think and sit and list your symptoms is quite hard. So I probably have missed out some symptoms that I have, but they were the main ones that I could think of that I do experience. Some more than others, some not very often, some worse than when I first got diagnosed, some better, but yeah, that is the list that I can think of off the top of my head. So now that you know what my condition is, what comes with it, a bit about how I got to the diagnosis, what was it like going through all of this as a teen? Well, it was hard. I missed a lot of school, so I spent a lot of time trying to catch up on everything that I'd missed. Thankfully, I wasn't too affected by it at my GCSE level, although I did get slightly lower grades than I was expecting, mainly because of my memory. I did used to very much prefer exams because I used to excel in them, but it fast got to the point where I preferred coursework, especially by the time I got to my AS levels. So basically in my AS levels I got an E in my maths and Spanish exam, which were two of my favourite subjects, and I had never to that point got an E in an exam in my life. I was devastated, to say the least, especially in my two favourite subjects. So basically I ended up dropping them, and I took on 2 years of BTEC law in one. So I decided it was a good idea to drop Maths and Spanish AS level and take on BTEC law moving into A level, and do both AS and A level law in the same year. Now, because it was coursework, I was able to go to all the lessons and just be able to catch up at home, which was really nice. It was a lot of work, obviously, doing 2 years of coursework in one, but to be fair, I actually ended up finishing my coursework before most of the people who had been doing that course for the entire of the 2 years. So that's what comes of actually changing over and actually doing something that benefited me. However, it did mean that because of this issue that I was having with exams, obviously I still had 2 A-levels that were exam based, so it meant that I ended up having to look at different unis to what I had originally planned. Basically ones that had lower entry requirements, because obviously at that point I knew that with the exams I still had to sit, even with the BTEC coursework, doing the 2 years in one, which I got a distinction star in, I might add, but I knew that I didn't have the memory to be able to get the grades in the exams that I still had to do, and that's basically why I hate exams, because they become a memory test. They don't test your knowledge, they literally test your memory, and as someone whose memory got really bad because of their condition, that's no good. But let's not go there, because that is a whole other different realm of ranting that we won't get into today. But basically, if it wasn't for dropping the 2 AS levels, I probably wouldn't have got into any of the unis that I actually applied to. So it is a good job that I made that decision to take on that BTEC coursework. But yeah, that shows you kind of how bad my memory got and how I went from being exam based to coursework based very, very, very quickly. It was hard, it was a struggle, but at the end of the day, I just had to get on and do it. Also, basically, while I was growing up, I was a really, really sporty person. I'm talking netball, trampolining, gymnastics, volleyball, you name it, I probably did it. And I'd actually end up participating in school competitions for these different sports, but that all changed by the time I got to high school. I was basically no longer able to do all of those. At first it was because I was just in too much pain doing those activities, so I had to drop out of a lot of them. And then as I kind of kept going through the diagnosis process, it just got to a point where they said you just need to stop because that's what's causing the pain. Obviously that wasn't what was causing the pain, but I stopped. And then when I did actually get my diagnosis, they said I basically had to stop all but 1 or 2 of them, and basically stick to the lower impact ones. So I went for trampolining basically because that was the one I loved most and it was one that I was probably best at. Obviously everyone's probably thinking that's the worst one I could have picked, but obviously the trampoline obviously moves down with you, so it's kind of lesser impact on your joints, and which I did discuss with the physio and she kind of agreed with me. So I decided to keep trampolining, but as a very sporty person, it got really hard for me because obviously it ended up being just me sat on the sidelines supporting my friends, cheering them on, watching, etc. And it was really hard doing that because obviously I was watching my friends carry on and be normal and doing everything that I wanted to be doing but couldn't be. It basically felt like I was trapped in a bubble where I was just watching everybody else have fun, and that didn't just stay in school at sports and other activities at school, that extended to outside of school as well. Obviously you can imagine when everyone was turning 18, I was watching everyone go out like every weekend, and when I eventually got to turn 18 in May, so had to wait a little bit of a while compared to all my friends, I was obviously not able to do that. I was kind of going out once a month if I was lucky, because I wasn't able to do what they were all doing. So I basically spent the remainder of my school life and probably the majority of my uni life as well. Obviously once I turned 18, obviously you go to uni, you all hear about the student experience, which I didn't have. So I spent the remainder of my school life and probably uni life just wishing that I was normal. Basically just wishing that I was able to do everything that everybody else was doing. However, as hard as that was, I think the hardest part was probably the gripe that I got from all of my classmates, basically about how I was making it all up for attention, that I was far too sensitive, that I cried about everything, that I wasn't able to have fun, I didn't know how to have fun. The list kind of goes on and on and on. The thing is, for a lot of the time that I was getting those comments, I didn't know what was wrong with me. Obviously I spent the majority, especially high school life, going through that diagnosis process, trying to learn what was wrong with me. Obviously I only got my diagnosis at AS level school year, so that would have been when I was about 16, 17. So I couldn't argue with them, I couldn't tell them that they were wrong, I couldn't explain to them why all of these things were me. And even when I got the diagnosis, it didn't help because only my close friends knew about it, because obviously they had been there for the entire of that diagnosis process, the back and forth to the hospital. And obviously it's not something that you go back to school and shout and scream about, hey guys, I've got this chronic condition. So obviously it was only my close friends that knew about it, not the wider school year, so that was really hard. If I can sum up how my school year thought about me, basically we had a sixth form ball where we had like light-hearted awards type thing that we all had to, like, there were certain categories and we all had to vote for who we thought was the best for each one. I got 2 awards, and do you know what those 2 awards were? Biggest drama queen and the most likely to appear on Jeremy Kyle. Now when I got called for these, the table that I was on was right at the back of the hall. So I had to walk up in front of my entire school year, laughing, pretending like I was absolutely finding this hilariously funny, because otherwise it would only prove the point. So yeah, I had to walk all the way to the front, not once but twice, and back again, pretending like it was all funny and it was all a big joke. And I know no one meant it in a negative way, but inside when I was walking up, I was red-faced, I was trying my best not to cry, because it really made me realise how misunderstood I had been for the entirety of my school year, basically. So yeah, that was probably the worst part. But to be honest, that was when a lot changed. I was no longer the quiet kid. I was no longer the shy kid. I wasn't the one that didn't have the confidence to speak up like I'd spent so many years at school doing so. Now, if you know me, you were probably sat there wondering how I was ever that way in the first place. But if it wasn't for those people that I went to school with, I wouldn't be that person that I am today. A lot of people turn around and say that they wish they could go back and relive their school days and remember what it was like. I am not one of those people. But like I say, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be the person I am today. So for all those people who gave me comments, who told me that I was just making everything up, to all those people that voted for me as the biggest drama queen and the most likely to be on Jeremy Kyle, thank you. Thank you for not understanding. Thank you for not realising that there may be more to me than what you were seeing, that there was more to me than what met your eye. Thank you for making me the strong, independent, mostly confident lass that I am today, because without you, I wouldn't be who I am. So, yeah. So, hopefully, that has given you all a bit of an insight into JHS, what it is, how I got diagnosed with it, and what it was like to grow up with it. I hope other people's experience of getting diagnosed with JHS at an early age are much better than mine, that your classmates were a lot more understanding than mine. It hasn't, as you've heard, been the easiest journey, but I have learnt a lot from it. Thankfully, I am able to manage my condition a lot better than I used to, even with an additional arthritis diagnosis, but that does come with time, as do a lot of things. And I'm certainly a lot less bothered now by comments from people who don't understand. Speaking of which, I actually have a video coming out in a few weeks of basically how to and how not to treat people that have a chronic illness, especially those with invisible illnesses. So if you have liked this video today, make sure that you keep an eye out for that one. If you're not already subscribed, get subscribing now so that you can see that when it comes in. Make sure you press the notification button as well and you'll get alerted when it comes in. And I will see you next week, guys. Bye!